Thank you, Buck Kiechel, and also want to thank Barbara, who I think was instrumental in hanging the show. And I think the installation really looks terrific. It's a show can be made or it can be completely blown apart by the installation. And so it takes some real sensibility and sensitivity to put a show up and make things work. So I'm very happy with that. I'll try and make this fairly short. I'll give you a quick kind of a rundown on sort of how all this happened for me. I was studying in LA in 1963 to become an illustrator. And my ambition was to go to New York. And I had this good buddy who had moved there and was at Merrill Lynch. And so I was going to go there. I was going to be an illustrator. And I was going to make a lot of money. And I began to realize that maybe there were other things that I wanted to do that still had to do with visual language, and that was painting. And it wouldn't make you a lot of money. But I was lucky enough to get a teaching job here at the University of Nebraska in 1968. And I got here. It was a one-year appointment. They weren't sure whether they'd be able to hire me back, but they did. And it was a really terrific time that I had here, both in terms of faculty that I knew, that I learned a great deal from, in terms of students who became friends, and just that kind of camaraderie, I think, that goes on at a university, certainly along with a lot of competition, too. A lot of bright people I was working with. So that's really what brought me here, and what sort of talked me into staying was, before I went over to meet the dean, I had a few minutes and I went over to the Sheldon Memorial Galleries, and that did it. I knew that this is where I wanted to be, and I knew I wanted to be here for at least a period of time so I could absorb what was going on in the gallery. And it was in the days of Norman Geske and John Nelson. And it was a very democratic place to be for me. They really opened up things for me. They let me go through the files. They let me go down into the basement into storage. I could look at paintings. I could sit down there as long as I wanted. I didn't ever tell them this, but I could rub my hands. I mean, there's a whole other thing you get when you rub the surface of a painting, you know. And so that really attracted me. I felt very, very fortunate to be able to do that. When I had an epiphany in '63 coming back from LA, and I was on the train, and it came out of Denver in the early morning, and pulled out onto the eastern plains of Colorado, and the sun was just coming up, and I looked out across those plains, and I knew I still had another 200 miles to go to get to Wichita. And I just had this extraordinary feeling that the horizon was going to be important to me. That it was not only an anchor for a painting, but it was also something that kept continually moving into the distance. And I found that to be very comforting. I was also starting to fly airplanes. My father was a professional pilot and taught flying and was a test pilot. So he taught me to fly. I think I soloed at the age of maybe 16. And so I got a lot from that too. My good friend John Spence, who I've been meeting with on Fridays for 40 years, feels like. I'll meet him one Friday at his house, and he'll meet me one Friday at my house, and I'll look at the work he's done, and he'll look at the work that I've done. Said to me once that that seemed like I was elevated in the paintings, that my point of view was always 20 feet above the ground, 10 or 15 feet above the ground. And he was the first one that ever told me that and ever pointed that out to me. So it made me think about it, and I realized that it had a lot to do, although I don't know that you would see it in the paintings, with the thrill I had when I was flying. And there's that period of time, and some of you fly out there probably in the audience, fly your own airplanes or fly other people's airplanes. And when you're coming in for a landing, sort of watching that earth just begin to slide by you and get faster and faster and get lower and lower to the ground, it's such a thrill. I don't fly anymore, and I miss it. I miss that that great thrill. So I think that the elevation of these paintings have a lot to do with that. The fact that you're not flat on the ground. Your feet are not firmly planted on terra firma. And at the same time, I think it not only gives them a kind of poetics, but it also gives them a kind of solid sensibility because of that, because most of you are on the ground. And out here in Nebraska, you know, it always feels like a miracle when you sort of go over a little rise, especially if you're going west, and you just come over a very, very subtle little rise, and then all of a sudden, boom, you can see 5 miles ahead of you. And, you know, you get that lovely hazy distance, and there's just something really, I think, that is magical about that. And it's remained magical for me for, well, I've been painting it for 45 years, I think. I'm not tired of it yet. And every once in a while, somebody will say to me, well, why don't you start painting something else? And I say, I wouldn't know how, you know. It just isn't part of my makeup. But the landscape is, and I hope that you can sense that in the paintings, and I hope that gives you a kind of sense of I'd like them to be calm. I'd like them to give you a kind of sense of calm and balance. So, if you have any questions, I would be happy to try to answer. So. Yes?
Most of your paintings have really tiny little detail along the bottom.
Yeah.
Do you use any kind of magnification when you paint?
I just recently I started using some magnification. I'm 76 years old, and these glasses still work for me. But every once in a while, I get a jeweler. I've got one of those jeweler things, and I can pull that down. And when I'm working on those little dots and dashes, which are really dots and dashes, but I'm able to convince you that they're buildings and that, you know, that there's space. That's the magic of painting. That's still the magic of painting after all of these years. What was it, 50 years ago, somebody said painting was dead, and they were so wrong about that, you know. You know, that's an intellectual for you. And the other thing I suppose that I would like to say is that I don't have a specific kind of formal philosophy about constructing paintings. I want them to sort of just come together in a natural sequence in the way that anything comes together that's living. You know, we all keep learning day after day after day, and the same thing happens to me. Every time I touch a painting, make a mark, rub something out, go back in and rethink about something in the painting, whether it's in the distance or whether it's in the foreground or it's way off to the right side. It's all organic, and it's all sort of working that way. And I feel immensely fortunate that I'm still doing it. I open the door to the studio every morning. I'm in a good mood. Rarely do I go through that door and feel grouchy. You know? Yes?
Most sincerity. I mean, wine and kind of natural is blissful sometimes, and not to put a political spin or a judgment spin on that.
Yeah.
A glass of wine, when you're sitting on a perspective, do you enjoy that, or is it even more pure? And how do you do it, honestly? Because the bliss.
Yeah.
For some of
Yeah, but also it's the mosquitoes too. Yeah, it is. It's blissful out there. And I'm really lucky that I get to do that. And I'm also lucky that most of the people who live out there and that I've had some kind of relationship with have all sort of been for me being out there. I'll be sitting at the edge of a field and somebody will stop and, you know, they'll look down at what I'm doing and they'll say, oh, you're working. And I think of myself in partnership with farmers and the people who own the land and till the land and work on the land out there. Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah. Wow.
literally, this is unbelievable. Lincoln, Nebraska.
Yeah. Lincoln, Nebraska. See, I couldn't have been in a better place. That's the other thing. You know, all my friends in grad school were heading for New York. And certainly I considered that because I had a great affection for New York. And I always looked towards New York. All of us out here in the Midwest, at one time or another, who are artists, look towards New York to see what's going on. And I never got to New York for any length of time. I spent one summer, I spent a couple of months in the city. I had a friend who had an apartment there. But I'm so glad that I'm not there because I don't have to be wrapped in theory. I don't have to go through all of the kind of things that people do when they're working in New York.
I'm one of these people.
Is that a New Yorker? Thank you.
What was your environment before you came to Nebraska?
Lawrence, Kansas. I was in,
So
yeah.
It was plains.
Yeah, it was the Plains, and I grew up in Wichita. So yeah, I'm a child of the Plains. Yeah. Yes.
Was there an artist who particularly influenced you, an instructor earlier on in your career?
There were two or three instructors. One was a guy named William Dickerson, who was a Wichita painter, and was a very, very good painter. Had no ambition to be anywhere other than Wichita, but he had the skill of Hopper. And Hopper saw it was coming through on his way to New Mexico and stopped to see the Wichita Art Museum because they own 3 Hoppers there. I think 3, maybe it's more. And Bill Dickerson showed us up, and Hopper said, "Who is this guy? I've got a meeting." And Hopper said, "Please, when you come to New York, I want to introduce you to my dealer." And Bill never went to New York. He could have gone. He could have had a career, you know. But he just, yeah, sorry. But, okay, that's my wife.
I said only for
Okay, is this okay?
No, you have to talk a lot louder.
A lot louder. Okay, a lot louder. All right.
There you go.
Okay, yes.
Keith, I think I was one of your first students when you came. You taught graphic design the first
I did.
Could you talk a little bit about the importance, because it's what I got from you, the importance of composition?
Oh yeah, that's
That your frame and the tightness, how things move around, and the tightness and importance of composition.
I don't like to think of composition as being tightness. Controlled is fine.
Yeah.
Controlled is fine. Composition is it's in a way it's the soul of the work. Everybody thinks it's the subject, but composition is really the language of the painting, along with the paint itself and the way in which it's handled. So you can paint a teacup, and if it's compositionally interesting and dynamic, it will be as interesting as painting wood nibs. You know, I mean, it's all interesting. It all has power, I think, if it works and the compositions are strong. Now, if you ask me what a strong composition is, I might have a different answer to that every other day. Yeah. Because I walk into the studio and I learn one thing and I scratch my head, and then a couple of days later I'm back at thinking about it again, and then I'm changing it again, and then yet it's compositionally something else. You're just sometimes moving, something just moving 2 inches on a 40-inch canvas, or an inch on a 40-inch, either laterally or vertically, however it might work, can be very important to the soul of the painting. Yeah.
I think that was the strongest thing I learned from you.
Oh, good.
Was how to make a composition sing.
Good. Gosh, I actually could do that. Yeah.
So how long did it take you to do that painting right over there?
Probably too long. I think I worked on this painting for a month or two.
Pardon me?
A month or two, off and on.
And you draw out sketches before you paint, or do you just paint?
I work on that counter back there are I think 3 or 4 of my sketchbooks, and you can look at those sketchbooks. You can't take them off the counter, but you can look at them. And you can sort of see how I work out compositions there. And they allow me to sort of think about how a painting is going to go together. Now, just because I make a drawing and I make a painting from a drawing or start a painting from a drawing, it doesn't mean it'll end up looking like the drawing. Because, you know, they have their own energy. They have their own sort of psychological and emotional power that's sort of beyond my, I don't know, I think it's sort of beyond my control sometimes. I say this every once in a while. I think our cats go in and work on those paintings overnight, and it's a good thing. I have them working on those because it makes things easier, much easier on them.
You have some very talented cats.
I sure do. You have cats, Bob? Yeah. Anybody else? Yes.
Yeah, I'm curious to know if you have, maybe in a mathematical sense, kind of a formula for how much horizon and then land that you're going to place in relation to the balance of the space of the sky. And as I've enjoyed your work and looked at your paintings, I always try to find a number that corresponds to the land that you see and how many times it could stack up on top until it fills the frame. So do you seek something out, or have you noticed in your work that you have found a standard or an average of how much land you can appreciate?
I think an average is a good word. I don't always set out to have a quarter land and 3/4 sky. In fact, some of the more recent paintings, the horizon lines moving up, and I'm really not sure why. Yeah. That's good. I'm using that. I'm using that. Yeah, sometimes that stuff sort of happens unconsciously, and then slowly but surely I figure it out. There was a faculty member at the university here when I first got here, Jim Eisentrigger, who some of you people probably remember Jim. And he was a geometric painter, and he was very much involved in math. And I almost flunked out of math when I was in high school. But he had this incredible intellect for math. And so he would figure paintings out mathematically. But at least I always thought it was purely mathematical. I mean, he would move things around too, without sort of crunching numbers. You know? But I got fascinated with that idea that math, first of all, is a beautiful thing to know and to sort of explore, because he loved it, obviously. But also that he could work things out on the paintings, and that usually they didn't look like math was, for me, they didn't look necessarily like math or was behind them. So I always thought that was interesting. We all use whatever we can, I think. You know, just sometimes they're big ideas, and sometimes they're small ideas. And sometimes they're just no ideas. You know, and I like walking in there sometimes without an idea and just go and I just start putting paint on the canvas, like an abstract expressionist would. And then it turns into something. Anything else? Someone asked me earlier, what do you want people to take away from your work? And first of all, I just tell them that I want them to take away an enjoyment of painting. But I do want them to take away an awareness. There is something outside of the city limits that's quite extraordinary. And you get people from the East Coast going across the plains at 80 miles an hour, so bloody, hardly wait to get to the West Coast. And they miss that extraordinary sensibility that's out here. You have to kind of slow down. It takes contemplation. It takes a beer sometimes, you know. And so I feel sort of sad for those people who think that the Great Plains is empty. But part of its magic is the fact that it has an emptiness to it, so that you can see it better. You know? No mountains in the way. No mountains in the way. Anybody else? I really appreciate you coming, everybody. Thanks very much. Thank you.